Welcome to this Accelerating the Quantum Ecosystem event hosted by the Sydney Quantum Academy. My name is Glenn Wightwick and I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Innovation and Enterprise at the University of Technology, Sydney, one of the 4 universities who are part of the Sydney Quantum Academy. To begin, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to elders both past and present, acknowledging them as traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. Today we have more than 450 people participating in this event, which I think is a fantastic testament to the depth and breadth of the quantum ecosystem here in Sydney. We also have a small group with us here at the Commonwealth Bank premises in South Everleigh, right in the middle of Tech Central. And I would like to acknowledge and thank the Commonwealth Bank for their wonderful support. For those of you who are joining online, thank you very much for your interest and participation. I would also like to welcome and acknowledge the Honourable Stuart Ayres, New South Wales Minister for Jobs, Investment, Tourism and Western Sydney, who we will be hearing from shortly. I'd also like to welcome the Honourable Gabrielle Upton, New South Wales Parliamentary Secretary and a great supporter of the research sector. Welcome to Dr. Chris Armstrong and Ms. Carrie Wang from the Office of the New South Wales Chief Scientist and Engineer, and thank you very much for your support. Colleagues from CSIRO, colleagues from Macquarie University, the University of New South Wales Sydney, the University of Sydney and the University of Technology, it's great to see you too. And finally, importantly and critically, welcome to our colleagues from industry. I say importantly and critically because the SQA is about building a quantum ecosystem here in Sydney, comprised of research, government and industry. And we have a lot of industry participation today, with representatives from the Australian Department of Defence, Main Sequence Ventures, Q Control, Microsoft, Airbus, Boston Consulting Group, British Petroleum, Cicada Innovation, Commonwealth Bank, Deloitte, Google, IAG, IBM, In-Q-Tel, KPMG, Munich Re, NBN Australia, QBE Insurance, Rio Tinto, SG Innovate, Westpac, Woodside Energy, Engineers Australia, AICD, Austrade and the Australia-Israel Chamber of Commerce. Well, what a year it's been. Just think back for a moment to this time last year when we were dealing with devastating bushfires raging across southeast Australia. Except for a few concerning signs from China, I don't think many of us would have realised that we were in the early days of a global pandemic. Terms like social distancing and COVID marshals hadn't yet been invented. Throw on top of all of this all sorts of geopolitical tensions, an economic recession, and a chaotic and somewhat disturbing US election, and 2020 is the year most of us want to get behind us. But despite all the challenges, we've been working hard to establish the Sydney Quantum Academy, a unique partnership between Macquarie University, UNSW Sydney, the University of Sydney, and the University of Technology Sydney, with generous support from the New South Wales Government. Back in 2017, recognising the growing opportunity in quantum computing and technology, the New South Wales Government established a fund to support quantum computing initiatives. Over dinner one evening, myself and 3 of my Deputy Vice-Chancellor colleagues realised that there was a great opportunity to bring our universities together in support of the New South Wales Government's vision, and the concept of the Sydney Quantum Academy was born. We're delighted today to be hosting this event and to understand the importance of SQA to the New South Wales Government's vision for the state and its importance to the Tech Central precinct. I would now like to introduce Minister Stuart Ayres, who's today attending this event on behalf of the New South Wales Premier. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of meeting Minister Ayres, he's a passionate advocate for jobs, investment, precincts and our economy, and as member for Penrith, his commitment to the development of Western Sydney is unparalleled. Please join me in welcoming Minister Ayres.
Thank you, Glenn. It's a fantastic opportunity to be here. I do want to immediately acknowledge my very good friend and parliamentary colleague, Gabrielle Upton, who is a passionate advocate for research and innovation here in New South Wales. And I have to say, a bit of a terrier when it comes to circling the wagons around ministers across the New South Wales Government. So Gabrielle, thank you very much for your continued leadership in this space and your presence here today. This is an important step and an important day on what is going to be an incredibly important journey for New South Wales, for Sydney, and indeed for Australia. And it's something that the New South Wales Government has identified from a very early stage how important it would be for us to take a forward-leaning position when it comes to quantum science and quantum computing. And I think in the genesis of that position is where the Sydney Quantum Academy was born, albeit it may have come from a discussion over a dinner table where most good decisions and good ideas have their genesis at some stage. But sitting alongside that was a strong focus that the New South Wales government has developed around the concept of precinct-based economic development or place-based economic development. And if you think about Sydney as a metropolis of three cities, a central city around Parramatta, a western city around the new airport precinct towards the Blue Mountains, and then here in the eastern city, each one of those cities needed their own strong economic development focus. And here in the eastern city, right on the doorstep of Sydney CBD, right next to our primary public transport hub in Central Station, came the idea for Tech Central. The idea of being able to bring together a place where the ecosystem around technology and research could grow and collaborate and foster, and really become a location where the most talented individuals across Australia come together. The genesis of the Sydney Startup Hub, the bringing of the Atlassian World Headquarters, property developments that will allow for more space, has seen over $48 million committed from the New South Wales government into making Tech Central a reality. And the Sydney Quantum Academy is such an important part of staking out ground, both here in New South Wales, but most importantly, across the world. I've got no doubt in this post-COVID world that we are all going into in a very rapid way, that the contest for talent will become one of the most defining economic attributes around the world. And we need to develop a location that acts like a vortex. And I use that word to emote some concepts about how important this is going to be. We want a vortex that sucks in the most talented people from across Australia, from around the world, to be part of an ecosystem of collaboration and research that acts like nowhere else on the planet. And when you've got such a significant advantage with these 4 universities and a concentration of researchers around quantum science already here in Sydney, we've got an opportunity to take our leadership position and put out a signal to the world that if you want to be at the leading edge of quantum research, if you want to be part of the most dynamic quantum ecosystem anywhere in the world, then the place to do that is right here in Sydney. And that's exactly why the New South Wales government has invested taxpayer dollars into this, but it's also why people like Gabrielle and myself talk so passionately about it. It's why we're here today. It's why we want to hear from what the panel has got to say, and it's why we're encouraging all of the businesses that are involved in today's session to get involved as well. We all want to understand what quantum computing will do for the provision of services by governments to citizens. We want to understand how it will improve our businesses. We want to understand how it will help us protect our citizens. There are many, many opportunities for us to do this. The one thing we all know for sure is that it will change the way we do business. It will change the way technology is applied to the daily lives of citizens. So we get a choice. We can either be passive spectators watching the rest of the world move ahead in quantum science, or we can choose to lead the world in quantum science. And the establishment of the Sydney Quantum Academy and leveraging the wonderful resource of the 4 universities, as well as the New South Wales government, is about taking a leadership position. And I want to thank you for being involved in the Quantum Academy today and into the future, because by doing so, you're taking a leadership position as well. Have a fantastic day.
Minister Ayres, thank you very much for your insightful words, and I absolutely agree with you. The concept of leadership, the precinct, and being attracting talent in quantum science is absolutely what we're about. I'd now like to introduce Professor Peter Turner. Peter was appointed the CEO of the Sydney Quantum Academy back in August, and prior to this was Director of the Quantum Engineering Centre for Doctoral Training at the University of Bristol. Peter has been active in the quantum field for more than 20 years, having worked in the UK, Japan and Canada. Peter was finally able to relocate to Australia about a month ago and spent, I'm going to say an enjoyable, but I suspect it wasn't, 2 weeks in quarantine, courtesy of the Australian government. Please join me in welcoming Professor Turner.
Thanks, Glenn. Thank you, Minister, for joining us today. Thanks to the panel and to the guests for taking the time to be here. And thank you, everyone tuning in online. Of course, we'd prefer to be hosting you all here, but current events have made that rather impractical at the moment. In the hopefully near future, We will be taking every opportunity to bring the quantum and wider communities together, so I hope to meet you in person then. We've heard that the Sydney Quantum Academy is a partnership between Macquarie University, the University of New South Wales, Sydney, the University of Sydney, and the University of Technology, Sydney. Each of these partners on their own has a long history of quantum research with world-recognized leadership in all areas of quantum technology when you look at them together. From developing groundbreaking quantum computing hardware in the solid state to breakthrough results at the foundation of computer science and mathematics. Together, we represent a global powerhouse in the field with a concentration of facilities and expertise that rivals anywhere on Earth. Right now, we have over 75 academics, 130 PhD students, 45 undergraduate quantum enrollments. In the past 5 years, our network has attracted well over 100 million in funding and published 1,000 research papers. For decades, Australia has been a leader in quantum research. And now that the world has recognized the enormous potential of a quantum economy with investments going from millions to billions just in the last few years, a step change in our efforts is needed to remain at the forefront. The New South Wales government wisely recognized this in matching the support from the partners for a new initiative to harness the collective potential of this network, giving birth to the Sydney Quantum Academy. The SQA is building Australia's quantum economy. Through our advisory board and others, we've engaged with global tech companies to develop future programs and initiatives to target the skills that are needed and to attract investment here. We are seeking to engage a dialogue with Australian corporations to understand their needs and together explore how quantum technologies can bring value to their business. At the same time, grassroots entrepreneurship is critical to a healthy ecosystem. And we will be rolling out a regularly hosted series of events to support this early in the new year. And importantly, in a rapidly developing technological field like this, we need responsible and equitable use of quantum technology to be understood. The SQA will bring together researchers, experts, and policymakers to ensure quantum technology is developed with the maximum benefit to society in mind. But at its heart, the SQA is all about people. We've already funded over 80 students and fellows pursuing quantum technology research in Sydney, and that network will expand to hundreds over the next 4 years. PhDs are critical to advancing the field, but a quantum economy requires a far broader approach to reach, for example, CSIRO's predicted 16,000 high-value jobs in Sydney by 2040. So we need to produce this vortex, as the minister described it, and the SQA is planning to address this by building the entire talent pipeline, right from high school students through to retraining interested classical engineers and business leaders. Through roundtables and other events, we'll also help inform the investment community, which is critical to this, and future customers in order to reach sustainability. Last but certainly not least, we have the opportunity to help build a more inclusive and diverse community. This principle has been woven into all of our programs and governance structure, with initiatives like our summer scholarship program that's just been announced, aimed specifically at the issue. So, if you're a student looking to enter the field, if you're a teacher looking to expand your curriculum, a business wondering what quantum tech can do for you, an R&D outfit looking for interns, an investor curious about opportunities, a deep tech entrepreneur who wants to share your experience, or a policymaker looking for expert advice, please get in touch with us. Our new website is live, I'm happy to announce, with the site there and the email address behind me. And I'm very happy to also point out our new logo, which was chosen by the entire Sydney quantum community, so very happy about that. Thank you very much, and with that, I'll leave you with a few words from our students.
I've always been really passionate about physics since I was young because I think it gives you the best opportunity to really understand the nature of reality. And with quantum mechanics in particular, it gives you an opportunity to explore the inner workings of the universe at a microscopic level.
There are effects like quantum entanglement, long-range correlations and interference effects that nature is just giving us for free and will provide a huge benefit for current and future technology and also for society as a whole. whole.
Quantum simulation is one of the main applications of quantum computing. It will help in the development of new pharmaceuticals, new renewable energy sources, new materials, and many other things that we cannot even think of.
I love the tech aspect of quantum computing. So as you can see behind me, we get to work with lots of really cool, complex and interesting equipment. And it's really satisfying to develop a mastery of that.
What excites me about being part of the Sydney quantum community is that we have one of the largest density of researchers in the broad spectrum of topics, and we can get to them just by hopping on the bus.
There are many benefits of the Sydney Quantum Academy Scholarship. I would say first and foremost, from a practical perspective, the scholarship provides me with the funding that I need to be able to pursue a PhD full-time.
One big benefit of being part of Sydney Quantum Academy is it gives me space to connect with peers and academics from my own university and the others across Sydney.
Why did I choose Sydney? Well, it's just great. There are many startups, 4 universities, and also industry opportunities.
Working in Sydney, you really feel like you're part of a world-renowned community, so it's really motivating to come to work because you really feel like you're working with the best.
So thank you, Peter, for your wonderful speech, and that video was fantastic. I think it's amazing to see the passion, energy of our students, and as we grow the Sydney Quantum Academy, we're going to have literally hundreds and potentially thousands of students involved in quantum science, which is brilliant. I'd now like to welcome and introduce our panel for the last part of the event today. Joining us on the panel here, we have, in no particular order, Professor Michael Biercuk, founder and CEO of Q-Control, Australia's first venture-backed quantum technology startup. Michael's a professor of quantum physics and quantum technology at the University of Sydney and chief investigator in the ARC Centre of Excellence for Engineered Quantum Systems. Joining us as well is Professor Gavin Brennen. He's director of the Macquarie Centre for Quantum Engineering and is also a chief investigator for the ARC Centre for Engineered Quantum Systems. Gavin completed his PhD at the University of New Mexico with a thesis proposing one of the first quantum computer architectures. Also on the panel is Dr. Kathy Foley, currently Chief Scientist of CSIRO. And early in the new year, she's actually going to be taking up a new role as Australia's Chief Scientist. So congratulations to Cathy. Dr. Foley has made many contributions to Australian science and most recently led the development of a quantum technology roadmap for Australia, which brought the sector together in a collaborative approach to growing our domestic quantum economy. And finally, Professor David Reilly, who holds a joint position with the University of Sydney and is partner and director of Microsoft Quantum Sydney. The focus of much of David's work is at the quantum classical interface and the scale-up of quantum technology. As a leader in Microsoft's quantum effort, he bridges the gap between fundamental quantum physics and the engineering approaches needed to scale quantum devices into quantum machines. Please join me in welcoming our panel. So we actually solicited questions from attendees ahead of time, and we received some really insightful and thoughtful questions. So I propose to jump right in and get our panel responding to them. For those of you online, you'll also notice to the right of your viewing screen that you have the ability to submit questions, which will come up on the screen in front of us as well. So please, if you've got questions, send them in. So to start, with the quantum ecosystem growing in Australia, and much of the talent being overseas in different markets, how do you feel Australia compares, and what are some of the ways we can fast-track its growth here? And this is open to anybody.
Who wants to go first? You go first.
I'll take it. In some respects, we are constrained, right? That we are geographically remote. There is a lot of talent that has resided overseas, but what we've seen is that there's actually been net migration of that talent to Australia and to Sydney in particular over the last decade or two. If you look at the University of Sydney, where I'm a professor, where David's a professor, there are, I think, 7 faculty members, senior faculty members who run teams, and only one of them or 2 of them are Australian, right? Everybody else is an immigrant who's come from abroad to join this community. So I think it's important to make clear that we're not starting from some tremendous disadvantage, right? That we actually have been a kind of beacon for the world in terms of this kind of activity. Now, there are areas in which we do have to, accelerate what's been going on in order to come up to speed. The commercial side of quantum science and technology in Australia has not been as advanced as in other places. We focused a lot on the research, but as you've seen from the kinds of investments that David and his colleagues have made via Microsoft, and that my venture capital backers have made in the work that we do for Q Control, there is this growing ecosystem, and I think this is one of the biggest opportunities via connection with the SQA, the student base, and also the general community.
I'll take a slightly different take on this, and that is that you're right, we are attracting a lot of people, and you probably saw that most of the students that we saw in that video had accents that weren't local. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges, is actually attracting our young people in Australia to see this as a vital way for a future career that's exciting. So I think one of the things which is going to be the challenge is not so much attracting international potential workers, but actually getting our local community to realise that this is a great opportunity. And then, as Michael mentioned also, I think Australia's been quite segmented over, forever, I guess, in the way we've had academia, industry and government, and there hasn't been much flow between them. But what I think we're seeing at the moment, and I think it sort of started probably about 5 years ago with the one of the governments at various stages innovation agenda, and we started to see things like the ON program, where people started doing accelerator university researchers and CSIRO researchers doing, looking at whether their research has got a market there, and really changing the way they think about their research. Instead of it just being something to publish a paper, it's actually something that might be meaningful and could lead to creation of a business. And that's a very significant shift for Australia. And I think we're only in the early stages. As I mentioned, it's probably only about 5 or so years. And it's something which I think has got the potential to accelerate.
David, perhaps from your perspective, working with Microsoft, what do they find attractive in terms of investing in, in Sydney and Australia as a place to do some of their work?
Yeah, it's a question that comes up a lot. It almost feels like it's somehow too good to be true, and it's obviously the typical Australian mentality. There must be a catch somehow. We'll speak very positively about this, but everybody will really think, of course, the United States or somewhere in Europe they must have something much bigger and more successful, and we just won't speak of it. But the truth is, absolutely, it is a real strength here in what's happening, and has been for a number of years. A number of key people in this room, to point to and thank for establishing that effort. I will reveal maybe some fragments of a conversation that I had both with Microsoft, but also with Intel going back 3 years. We were at an interesting sort of time where we were, moving into this large partnership with Microsoft, just as also a partnership with Intel was kind of taking off, and it was a little bit of a, which way do we go? And in fact, they were had worked together many, times before, and so it was pretty easy. But I remember very clearly, a little bit like the story of sitting around having a dinner and talking about the SQA, having a dinner with leading, people within both companies, and asking them after a few glasses of wine, why are you guys really so interested in what's happening in Australia? And when I look around Microsoft's program, big effort at TU Delft in the Netherlands, big effort at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, big effort here at the University of Sydney. Where is Harvard? Where is Princeton? Where is the usual destinations you would think of in the US? And they actually had a very clear answer that the Australian model and aspects of the European model in terms of academia were absolutely well positioned for this type of work. You don't want a highly political, university department that's racing for the next glossy magazine publication. You want a culture and an environment that's really geared for the long term. And Australia was, very much identified, both I think on a kind of personal level in what they saw at that time, but they brought, I think, the context of having worked in Australia before and worked with Australian academia, that this is where you can actually steadily make, progress on hard problems, and the government will work with you. The universities can come together, and industry can actually build, something out of all of those components. And I was kind of blown away because I hadn't really appreciated that, having grown up in, obviously in this culture. But there was Intel and there was Microsoft saying, we would really rather not build a major activity of the scale that we're doing in Australia in the United States for those very reasons. So we have something here that is almost, indescribable from the point of view of the usual Australian lens of it couldn't possibly be true, little old us, to have in our hands something that really, may change the world. But the fact of the matter is we're absolutely, arguably, there is no other destination in the world that has these key ingredients and has, I think, the depth of legacy and connection, to the broader framework of government and the like. So it's now up to us, obviously, what we do with that.
Fantastic. So following on from that, what are some of the areas of quantum science that Australia is strong in and best positioned to keep driving from a development research perspective?
Well, I would certainly say there's a long history of photonics here. Like one of the precursors for this entire field that gives me a living and everyone on the stage, well, maybe not Cathy, but maybe not the host, but is quantum optics was a field that came before quantum information. And some of the leading textbooks in that field from the 80s and 90s came out of Australia. And so you build a core research expertise, and then they realized, well, these kinds of ideas really bring us to new technologies using the laws of quantum mechanics. And now in Sydney, what's I think really unique about what we have here is a wide breadth of expertise, everything from the hardware for building quantum computers, using things like quantum dots, or Majorana fermions, or silicon, and also the software to run on them, and also the pure theory to think about the future challenges to making these devices work, which they call error correction. And so you can take people from lots of different expertise, from computer science, engineering, even mathematics, and certainly physics, and they'll find really exciting projects to work on, and the expertise to work with here.
There's also what we're seeing, say, in the quantum computing area, is the quantum simulation, even as we're waiting for the full computer to come online, is showing that you can solve problems which are unsolvable in other ways. And I'm just, for example, I think it was Microsoft published a paper just recently looking at a whole new way of designing catalysts. Now, who would have thought that's a sexy area? But in actual fact, it's the basis for a whole lot of manufacturing processes. And if you want to go to an industry that is electrified or low energy, then we have to actually look at new ways of doing some of our chemical processes, which is the basis of modern manufacturing. So the chance of actually using a quantum computer to design a new material, which you wouldn't have been able to do in any other way, and then work with the people who actually turn that design into a reality, suddenly opens up the door for a whole lot of industry shifting, which is absolutely needed if we want to have the sustainable future that we're all looking to have.
So one thing that I wanted to add to this is we've talked a lot about quantum computing, which is a very exciting area. And it's an area in which I think everybody here is quite active. My academic team builds quantum computers out of trapped ions. My company, Q Control, builds the software that makes quantum computers actually functional. But there is much more to quantum than just quantum computing, even though it may be the sexiest in the cultural zeitgeist right now.
Oh, no, I disagree with that, because a quantum sensor person, magnetometers,
That's exactly right, that we have a lot of activity in Australia on what you can call nearer-term applications of the same kinds of concepts that come from the fundamental physical research that's been going on for so long. In magnetometry, as Cathy said, some long-term CSIRO work, in gravimetry, detecting gravitational signatures that can be used to detect water underground, in atomic-based navigation. This is an area where Q Control has a very large activity, working with commercial partners and public sector partners to build a new generation of quantum-enabled navigation systems that have impacts on the transport sector, on the mining sector, defense sector, and the like. All of these things emerge from the same core investments in quantum physics that have been made over the last decades, and also deliver prosperity on a slightly shorter timescale than the longer-term play in quantum computing.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point, Michael, that when we talk about quantum science, it does have that application across a broad range of fields. Having said that, if we could just think about quantum computing for a moment, and we've just received a nice question on the screen here, which lines up with another nice question that was sent in previously, which is, what do we think as a panel some of the most promising first use cases may be for quantum computing in the next 3 to 5 years. In what direction does it head in terms of industry? And I'll just read the question from the on the screen here is, where does the panel see the growth in Australia in practical application of quantum technologies, and how can organisations like TAFE New South Wales and other vocational training organisations help in training students for jobs in the future? And if you look at someone like Michelle's work out at Uni of New South Wales, there's an enormous amount of technical equipment in there which presumably is going to need a lot of expertise to develop and deploy. So big set of questions, interested in people's perspectives.
Maybe I'll jump in. Absolutely. I mean, I think the first wave, in fact, is not quantum itself, but of the supporting infrastructure that's really pushing the envelope in order to be able to do that research and development that's needed, to build quantum devices, whether it be in lithography and fabrication technologies that are really advancing what you can build, measurement devices, precision measurement, metrology, electronics, cryogenics. All of this supporting infrastructure itself is cutting edge and needs a huge effort in its own right. And you're seeing, I think, already worldwide, small companies start up, not trying to build quantum computers or quantum sensors, but are building electronics or building cryogenics that is in support of that broad effort. And I think one of the really interesting things that we're starting to see play out is very different from the model you might have in say traditional semiconductor manufacturing, where today there are very large foundries around the world, somewhat isolated and decoupled from the kind of intellectual capital of how to engineer a transistor or build an integrated circuit. There's, after 40, 50, 60 years, there's now a separation between manufacturing and the original ideas. But where we are is back in 1940, and I think the manufacturing sector is looking to build capacity around where the ideas are, where the expertise is, because it's so easy, particularly in an area like quantum computing, so easy to kind of get that wrong. You need constant, consultation, constant input, and we're seeing, real physical manufacturing efforts and large numbers of jobs worldwide now spring up around the center of mass in quantum, because you have to understand what it is that you're going to build in order to then position something to define, for instance, a foundry, to think about what tools would be in that foundry, what would it deliver, when will it deliver, what's the business opportunity in case. Doing that somewhere remotely in Texas is pretty challenging. How do you do it that's close enough to the action that you really understand the issues? So I think we're going to see a lot of that before even the real quantum mechanics switches on.
I think this is a really important point, that the benefits of this investment in the Sydney Quantum Academy in the research that we're doing and the commercial opportunities are not restricted to some extremely narrow set of people who've earned PhDs in quantum physics. At Q-Control, my first hire was a software engineer who had worked for big banks and other sectors. My second hire was a head of design, someone who focused on how you build products for the internet, right? Mm-hmm. And the company now, which has over 40 people in just a little over 3 years, is about 50-50 between people with quantum backgrounds and people who come from product engineering and product marketing and whatever else. There is huge opportunity through this field, not just for people who are specifically technically trained, but for all the things that make our businesses work. And we're really excited to be able to leverage that. I think that the question before asked about TAFE, we need machinists, we need people who know how to code, we need people who know how to do product design, we need people who know how to do hardware design. All of these are things that are well suited to the public sector vocational training system, and that's a critical part of what we're doing.
Also, one other thing is really important to bring the community with us, so that we end up with a social license to do this. You can imagine that there'll be stories about how things quantum could be used for bad outcomes. And so it's really important too that we bring the social science with it, and that we also engage, as you mentioned, the economists, the banking industries and all parts of government to understand exactly what is needed to have the regulatory place and set up the policies there so that we are able to be, I guess, quantum ready.
So that actually, Cathy, leads to a nice other question that's just arrived on the panel here, which is, when is the right time for leaders from other industries such as banks, pharma, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing and so on to start working to understand quantum technology?
Now.
So yeah, now absolutely. And I mean, really, if you just type in quantum computing on Google and like threats with quantum computing, the first thing that will come up is about cracking public key cryptography. It's, we rely on the security of all our digital transactions, sending credit card information over the internet and so forth, because mathematics has told us that these algorithms are secure, like RSA and elliptic curve digital signatures. And in fact, they are not secure against quantum computers. And the companies now, even though it's likely is going to take more than 10 years before we get a big enough device, which might have 8 million or so physical qubits to perform those tasks, to crack those codes, the companies want to get on board now with making quantum safe transactions using things like post-quantum cryptography. And there's been a call at the National Institute of Standards and Technology a few years ago to develop algorithms which would be safe against threats from quantum computers. And they expect to have the actual announcement of the chosen winner or winning codes around 2022, 2024. So the companies that are going to get on board with that, they really need to understand the scope of the threat, which ones to pick if they want to get started now with choosing their post-quantum cryptography, and what can they tell their investors about how secure the transactions are going to be in the within a 10-year time span.
That's also got the potential of creating, say, for example, in Sydney, which has got a very big financial centre for the Asia Pacific area, to actually have an advantage by being quantum ready. So encouraging all businesses to think about in their risk registers, what's their quantum risk planning for that. Just like they did with the Millennium Bug. It's, people have spent 10 years preparing for that. And it was something which, when it happened, it just clicked over and everyone was ready. I think we're really well placed in Australia to be a go-to place for finance to come, and any organisation that is using a encryption of any sort to protect their data is, it's clear that there's great opportunities by setting up, the regulatory requirements or the culture that this is the place to go to as well.
So switching gears and thinking a little bit about the sort of startups, and Mike, you've talked a little bit about this and in fact have successfully started up your company Q Control. I know other companies like Quintessence Labs based in Canberra. What are some of the barriers that are preventing or making it hard for startups in the quantum space here in Australia?
Well, the first thing is it's not talent. I'll come back to that again. I think, entrepreneurship in this space of startups is something that is reasonably new in terms of the tech sector in Australia. And that means that primarily the intersection of the sector with other parts of the economy, like government and universities, these are things that we're kind of working through in real time right now. I had the tremendous benefit at the University of Sydney of having a very easy time of making my transition from full-time academic to academic with a footprint in, continuing my research team, maintaining the laboratory, et cetera, but then taking a full-time role running Q Control. And, I can't emphasize how easy it was, especially compared to some of the horror stories I've heard from others who are at universities not in Sydney. There are policies on the books at other universities in Australia that talk about academics can have no more than 1% equity in any company they start based on the work they do. Well, no investor will touch you. You are uninvestable if that's the baseline. So fixing some of these higher level political issues when it comes to the way universities interact with their academics and allow for frictionless transfer between industry and academia is important. Another is getting better engagement with the government as a customer. Right. So in the United States, you can hear from my background, I come from the US. I worked at an agency called DARPA, which is very famous for inventing the internet, among other things. But they were a model for being investors, but also seeing companies that would, ultimately end up selling to the government. And that's something that's a little bit newer in Australia. The idea that the biggest customer of an emerging technology company can be the government. We hear about Palantir, which is going for a float a public offering now, God knows how many billions of dollars. Their first real customer was a sole source contract from the CIA that was at least 8 figures, right? We don't actually know how big it was. So, there are huge opportunities in getting better interaction with defense, with intelligence, with the educational sector, with all these various parts of government that can streamline the pathway for individual researchers to become entrepreneurs, but also for the companies that we start to succeed. Because the fact is, there is not a giant enterprise market in Australia the same way there is internationally, and we need to find the opportunities we have. And then the last point I'll make on this is the necessity to realize that this is a 100% global activity. We've been funded by US agencies for years. We continue to be funded by them. We have international collaborations in our research teams. My company has an office in Los Angeles as well as in Berlin. The idea that we build a wall and just keep it here because that's the default mentality of how you preserve value, how you capture value, that doesn't work in our sector. And so we need to make sure that we set the policy levers to be correct for allowing and enabling our global growth such that the value can be captured at the headquarters here.
So I wanted to switch gears and talk a little bit about talent. Mike, you mentioned talent a moment ago, and clearly one of the big focuses of the SQA is to kind of create that talent pipeline. What are we doing in that space? Are we doing enough? Are we going to be able to retain that talent in Australia, recognising that, as you say, it is a global industry that we're participating in? And there's a question that's also come through on the panel here, which is related, which is what technical but non-academic jobs will become prominent in quantum computing in the coming years? What's the appropriate education for those jobs? So how do we build that pool of talent for us here in Australia?
Maybe I'll start. I think when it comes to talent, I mean, a lot has been discussed about the talent shortage broadly. There's a great article in the New York Times from a year and a half ago or so, and obviously it's been a central mission of SQA to develop the wider talent shortage that we think we will, we have and that we'll need to solve in order to be able to really build this industry. But it's a particular kind of talent, I think, that is really hard to develop. It's the type of person that can bridge disciplines at this early phase of the field and of the development of this technology. Where I really see a need is people that can recognise enough about a related area and be able to translate that into another one. And a lot of my kind of day job within Microsoft, I find that I'm a translator. I'm trying to pull up a meeting to say, just a second, what they're talking about is a little bit different to what you're talking about, and we have to bring this together. And once that clicks, then all of the talent and the abilities of both sides come together. When you look at SQA, it's fantastically positioned actually to develop people that can bridge many different domains and fields, from software through to different hardware technology platforms, different ways of thinking, different backgrounds, all coming together and sharing knowledge and their own experience. And I think that is the thing that's going to be super powerful, rather than very isolated, siloed niche expertise, which we also need. I think it's really about the opportunity at this phase to have people that can translate and bridge different fields, because there's a huge amount of development and ideas out there in the world, if only you know how to put your problem in the right language and hear a solution that then makes sense. A great example is the AI community, and I think there's huge opportunity for AI and quantum, mostly using the techniques of AI and ML to further quantum systems. But 5 minutes into that conversation, and most people are lost. It's pretty hard to really connect those worlds in a meaningful, concrete way, figure out what is the actual problem you're going to work on, how are we going to recognize the solution. So I think when it comes to talent, it's about bridging. Maybe just a quick comment on those other opportunities beyond the sort of traditional academic ones. Is there an opportunity for Western Sydney? I just was looking in the ride over at a receipt that came in my inbox. I think we spend about $30,000 to $40,000 a month on printed circuit boards, metal enclosures, fittings, and most of that is China at the moment. The opportunity to even take a fraction of that work and have that kind of turnaround locally, to be able to work with people that are trained in that technical domain, and to be able to build on that, their capabilities, and have that knowledge again feed into what is possible, what's hard, what's easy. I think that's a major game changer. So it's absolutely much more than just about university degrees and opportunities for academics.
I'd like to build on that too. I think, first of all, we advertised for a cryogenic engineer. There's lots of air conditioning engineers in Australia, not so many that cold. And so we have to really see how we can encourage and make clear, and I imagine that's part of the Quantum Academy's plans, is to say, what does the TAFE training need to be, so that we've got technicians who can go beyond air conditioners all the way down to millikelvin temperatures and be able to do the stuff that goes with it. And as you mentioned, supply chains, there's great opportunities. It's not as though the supply chain for a quantum computer is unique to quantum or to quantum systems in general. We've got lots of device development happening across Australia in various different laboratories, and they sort of tend to get stuck there because it's really hard to take hardware and commercialise it. You've got to have packaging, you've got to have all the calibrations and also the after-sales management, and there's a whole range of aspects of technical things which require a supply chain of small startups that actually deliver bits and pieces that then eventually possibly a multinational or something like the Silicon Quantum Computing Company will then pull that together to integrate and deliver it, say, to Department of Defence or to state government. And so recognising the different bits in that chain as absolutely critical, and it's something which will require us to shift, I think, the sorts of things we teach. And then final thing is actually, we know that most people want a job, so we need to make sure that we let the world know that there are jobs here, and make sure that we do that outreach of celebrating the fact that you're employing 40 people. In Australia, that's a big SME because we have 97% of our companies are SMEs, and 70% of them have less than 20 people. So that means that you're in the 30% of and so it shows that it is possible for these deep tech companies to really grow. And I think that's where government policy is coming from, is recognising that deep tech companies have the ability to grow fast, employ lots of people, but we need to make sure that kids at school, who usually by the time they get to the end of high school, are thinking in very traditional lines of, am I going to be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant? And they're not necessarily thinking, am I going to be a quantum engineer? That's not on their agenda. And the thing is, their parents don't think it's on the agenda because they want their kids to be off their hands, as we all want our children to be off our hands eventually. And so therefore we want to have security. So that whole understanding of painting that picture which is real, I guess, and something where people think there's security of jobs there.
Cathy, just taking that one step further, we know from looking around the quantum computing, quantum science, quantum technology conferences that the field is a pretty male-dominated field. So how do we bring more girls and women into this space? Because I think we understand we need to. What can we be doing here in Australia to take a leadership in that space?
Look, this is a big issue in all engineering and physics type areas, which are more technically oriented. Part of the reason is that it's deeply embedded in the way we bring up girls, so that we're taught to like Barbie dolls and pink and do girl stuff. And you see occasionally females get through that and aspire to being something other than traditional female roles. So I think we've got to work with that. And if you look at all of us, when we're assessing, say, CVs, there's clear evidence that, and I can give you the number that came from a PNAS paper from a couple of years ago now, that women to get the same ranking have to be 2.6 times better with their, and it's males and females do this ranking too, so it's a deeply unconscious bias that we have. And there's been work done around the world which is beginning to show one of the simple things you can do is actually remove gender or names from applications, so that you start, as soon as you start doing that, you actually start seeing numbers come through. And then I guess the other one is too that we still have sexual harassment in the workplace is still a big issue. There's still a sort of that sort of culture which isn't necessarily inclusive. And then the final thing is that just look at the last Australian census. Women do something like, I think it's 7 to 14 hours a week of housework, men do less than 4. So guys need to do more housework to support their partners and so that they have time on task. We all know no one does science 9 to 5. So if you're spending an extra day a week doing the housework, that just actually takes your time off. And then childcare is a major issue. It's still the major role of women to consider that. And we need to support and invest in supporting women during that plateau period where they've got young kids. Childcare is really expensive. I'm glad I don't have little kids now. I don't think I'd be able to afford to have, I had 3 kids under 5 at one stage and it was bad enough then, and now childcare's up to over $100 a day per child. So you don't earn that much often when you're an early career researcher. So I think there's some really classic structural issues that are easy to solve, but they do need investment, and they do need the realisation that if we want to be not just inclusive because of equity reasons, there's all the evidence in the world that says that gender equity actually leads to better outcomes, all businesses do better, problem solving happens. So that means we need to embrace the full human potential, and that does require us to invest in it.
I couldn't agree with you more. Just going a little bit further than that, and one of the questions here I think touches on this as well. Quantum science and engineering is obviously a complex technical area. What can we do to help the broader community understand this space? And I think that could come back to schools and particularly girls to make them excited and attracted to work in this area. And perhaps some of the other people on the panel can help us.
Yeah, so there's some great resources right now on YouTube for learning pretty complicated topics, very well presented, and they're professionally done. And oftentimes the target is middle school or high school. And there's a few scattered productions on quantum technology, but certainly I hope in the Sydney Quantum Academy we can really get on top of that and produce some content that might have a few more Australian accents than people are used to around the world, but we spread the word. And there's some excellent examples of programs in the U.S. where they're math talent programs where they bring in people at the high school level, and I see no reason why we couldn't do that also. Really, you only really truly understand something when you can teach it, and if you can teach it at the high school level, it means that shows a sophistication of understanding. And you start to draw the attention, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to do that here in the SQA.
We also, we have an opportunity to build on the talents and the strengths that we've already assembled. And so, one interesting thing about the emerging quantum industry in Australia is that, like other places, there is a very heavy emphasis on academics who are transitioning, people who have been professional educators transitioning into roles leading companies, leading big divisions in companies and the like. And meanwhile, companies like Q-Control, we bring in all these people from outside who are professional software engineers, professional front-end designers, people who make the interfaces that everybody deals with on a daily basis online. And we saw, for instance, an opportunity to take those two things and combine them together to serve this purpose, to help in the educational mission by making the best interactive tools available for training people who are new to the field of quantum technology. And it comes from a bunch of SQA members, so myself as an academic, Chris Ferry from UTS, who has come on as a quantum education advisor to Q-Control, building top-notch content that's coming from real serious research leaders in the field and being delivered to the broad community of people in enterprise, in banks, of high school students, of undergrad students who are interested in this field through the kind of real professional online interface that they expect from the best games that they interact with, the best social media platforms that they interact with. It's a great opportunity for value capture as well. And again, it's coming from this confluence of capabilities through the SQA.
So we've got about 6 minutes left. There's a question that's popped up here, which is how can we best help the quantum community in Australia and Sydney build stronger partnerships with industry? What areas of collaboration will be most beneficial?
I think the industry outreach which I guess you described there, Michael, is a really good starting point. I think there is a responsibility for all of us in this quantum area to actually have the ability to explain it, as we've heard, in a way which is crystal clear. But I think there's a lot of shoe leather required here. I think what we've seen is breakthrough happening when you bring people together with events and the sorts of things that happen in that almost in that makerspace startup community, but bringing in the broader industry sector, I think is one step. But I'm not sure you guys might have other ideas.
Yeah, I think recognising that industry obviously does certain things very well, other things not so well, and I think it's very challenging for this field, to imagine industry of various scales somehow absorbing all of the challenges of quantum information science. It's still so early, and I think it also goes to aspects of outreach and education, that there are deep fundamental questions here that nobody yet knows the answer to. It's certainly about advancing the technology, engineering, manufacturing, but at the same time, we're still trying to figure out the very basic aspect here and scratching our heads about how to even understand what this stuff is, what it means, what its philosophical implications are, what does it teach us about reality, what does it teach us about the universe, and how do we even make sense of that before turning it into something that's actually useful. So somehow we have to walk both the fundamental, the inquisitive, and the technological, and I don't think you can have either. I think it has to be this balance. Industry in general, industry is not driven, not an ideal environment for discovering new things in that sense. We need students breaking things and serendipity and accidental discovery, and I didn't do what you said, I did what I thought, and that turned out to be true, not you. All of that stuff that students do so well, that has led to so many discoveries, and I think you can look back in history at all the big discoveries, nearly all of them have a story behind them that was not the direct line of sight. This is what we're going to do. We're going to tell nature how it'll be, and out will pop the thing we wanted. I think it's all about creating an environment where when those accidents happen, discovery drops in your lap, the ability to recognize it, understand that this is important and do something with it. And again, an SQA, I think, is partly about this, the balance of big ideas, opportunity to recognize them, fundamental discovery, serendipity, but also with the muscle of industry to very quickly go from a discovery into something that's going to have impact. So I think it's both. And industry, certainly companies like Microsoft understand that. That's why they're deeply invested in universities. For the long term, this is not about get rich fast. This is about decades. It's going to take decades to really see this technology come to life. And I think it's got to be, all sectors of society that eventually, give us all the ingredients we need to see it realized.
There will be sensors sooner, though.
One quick comment on this. I think, part of the challenge is we need to change our narrative a little bit. When we say the word industry, most of us will conjure Microsoft, maybe a couple of defense contractors, General Motors or Holden previously. But as Cathy said, most of industry is actually small enterprise. And I think that's the best opportunity for engagement. Obviously, we do interact with the big companies. Microsoft is a great example. But if you're a small company that does web development, there are opportunities for engineering solutions in the quantum technology industry. If you do manufacturing via advanced machining, well, we make things. I'm a plumber most of the time in my academic lab. I mean, if you build electronics for that used to go into avionics systems or into vehicle control systems, those electronics and that skill set can be repurposed for the developments we see in the quantum industry. And I think this is a great way to diversify the economy and build resilience. In 2020, which was a pretty horrible year for lots of reasons, especially with COVID in Australia, Q Control did not lay off anybody. We did not retrench anybody. In fact, we almost doubled in size, right? And that comes from the fact that there is tremendous diversification in the economy coming from this sector. And of course, we bought a lot of stuff in that time as well. So it's a different way of thinking about the industry engagement with our sector.
I just want to add too that I think industry has a big role to play in establishing standards for quantum technology. Right now, it's a little bit like the Wild West. I mean, someone says they have a device which can send so many qubits down a fiber optic line with photonic qubits. Are you going to trust that? What metric are they using to say that they're actually doing that, or that they can store quantum information in hard drives and devices in classical computers are very well spec'd, but we need advice and input from industry to help us establish that, so that if you buy something from Sydney versus buying something from Singapore or China, you can be expecting to get the same quality based on the numbers.
So look, thank you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for questions, but I think the panel, I think it was a great idea to jump straight into the questions. We had a really interesting discussion today. Could you please join me in thanking our panel?
Thank you. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you, panel.
And this brings us to the formal conclusion for today's event. Thank you again to our guests, our speakers and panelists, and recording of the event is going to be available to all of those who registered to attend. Thank you to all of you who have joined online. It's been fantastic to bring together more than 450 people from across industry, research and government. And I'd really like to acknowledge the SQA team behind the scenes who put on this event. I'm incredibly excited about the future of quantum science, technology and engineering in Sydney, New South Wales and Australia, and look forward to seeing SQA contribute to Australia's leadership in this space. Thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.